Mosaic. Man, I have a sense of expectation this morning that, I don't know, that God's going to do something. I know I'm supposed to say that every Sunday, but this is one of those weeks where I kept getting interrupted with what I was doing and had to run to the computer and type stuff, so I just feel like God's going to do something. So before we jump into the deep stuff, though, how many of you remember the movie The Sixth Sense? I'm going to go totally not spiritual here for a minute. Well, kind of, I guess. I don't know, it depends how you look at it. I'm referencing a 20-year-old movie, so some of you are like, I was 6 when that came out, man. I don't know what you're talking about. So just to recap, if you can't remember, it was a movie about a child psychologist who's trying to help this very troubled boy. And in like the most iconic line in the movie, the little boy is laying there and he goes, "I see dead people." Do you remember that? And it's been mocked for 20 years, so it kind of lost its impact. But that was a crazy line at the time. Remember, like that was really creepy. So this child psychologist, played by Bruce Willis, is trying to help this kid. Obviously doesn't believe him, but then comes through a series of events to believe that this kid is in fact seeing dead people. But that's not the greatest turn in the movie. The greatest turn in the movie is you get to the very end. And the very child psychologist who's trying to help this kid, you find out he's been dead the entire movie. And he's one of the dead people that this kid is seeing. It was a crazy moment. And I know I talked to some people and they're like, "Oh, I saw that coming." I'm like, well, that sucks for you, because it was a really cool moment for me, because I did not see it coming at all. And what happens in those moments is like, you watch the whole movie from one perspective, and you have all these assumptions based on what you see. But then in a moment like that, your perspective gets shifted. And all of a sudden, you're looking at the same thing from a completely different angle, and you go back and you kind of reevaluate everything you saw, right? Like, you're like, oh my gosh, his wife wasn't mad at him. She just didn't see him. He was dead. Like, that's a crazy thing. By the way, gentlemen, when your wife's not speaking to you, pinch yourself. Just make sure you're still alive. She might have killed you. That's one of the lessons from the movie. But I love movies like that. Like, I'm not really into horror movies, but I love movies where you kind of watch it from one perspective and you see everything, and then you have a moment, one of those twists where all of a sudden you want to go back and reevaluate everything you saw based on that twist. I love those perspective shifts. And that kind of a thing is really important in life too, right? Perspective. The ability to look at the same thing from not just one angle, but from another angle. The importance, we have to acknowledge the importance of perspective, because sometimes you can look at the same thing from two separate places and it changes everything. C.S. Lewis said it this way: what you see and what you hear depends a great deal on where you are standing. It also depends on what sort of person you are. Perspective changes everything, right? Sometimes you can be too close to a situation, you can't see the big picture. Sometimes you can be too far from a situation, you can't see important details. Sometimes you can only really see one side and you completely are in the dark on the other side. Perspective changes everything. Perspective can help you see things that other people can't see, even if you're looking at the same thing. Perspective can help you have a different attitude than everybody else has, even though you're all experiencing the same thing. Perspective can help you make a different decision than everybody else around you would make, because even with the same information, because you got a different angle. Perspective allows you to see something else even though you're looking at the same thing. Perspective changes everything. So what I want to talk to you about today is your perspective when it comes to suffering in your life. Hardship, trouble, pain. What is your perspective when it comes to bad things happening in your life? Where you stand, the angle that you look at those things will determine your perception of suffering in your life. And your perspective on suffering will determine how you endure it, how you react to it and live through it. Because listen, everybody suffers, right? Like we have to acknowledge that thing you're going to look at, everybody has that. Everybody has some kind of pain, some kind of suffering in their life. But some people look at it from one angle, and then there's these other people. They experience the same stuff, but they seem to look at it from a different angle. They seem to be able to like hear a tune that we can't hear. They seem to like be able to smell something we can't smell. They see something we can't see. And it's those people that I want to learn from today. So what is your perspective on suffering? Before we jump in, would you pray with me? Jesus, I thank you for like being here. And I know there are some people in this room right now who are experiencing suffering in their life. And I feel like that's probably why you messed me up this week with this sermon. And I pray that you'd be here, like not just be here like you're always here, but be here in like a special way, Lord. We need your closeness. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so we're in a series looking at the 7 letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and chapter 3 in the book of Revelation. 7 letters to these 7 different churches in 7 different cities. Last week we looked at Ephesus. If you weren't here, we hit the first one. And then this week we're looking at the letter to the church in Smyrna. And that starts in verse 8. So we'll just jump right in here. Write this letter to the angel of the church in Smyrna. This is the message from the one who is first and the last, the one who is dead but is now alive. So just to give you some real quick background in case you weren't here, these letters, they all kind of start with this language, write this letter to the angel of the church. And we talked about last week, most scholars believe that what that means is it's a letter to the leader of the church. It's a reference to the leader of the church. John would say, like, hey, the leader of the church is an angel. Unfortunately, you guys do not have that privilege here, but it's a little different. But it's a reference to the leader. So it's kind of like hey, write this to the leader of the church. And then all of these letters are from Jesus. So Jesus is the one who was dead and now is alive. Which is kind of a crazy thing, that Jesus is the one now dictating this letter to John, who John is then going to send it to these different churches in these different cities. So really important stuff coming from Jesus himself. So what comes next is the letter, and I'm going to put the whole letter up here. It's not super long. It's going to be a little small, so I'm sorry if you can't see, but I wanted to just kind of give you the whole picture of this letter in one snapshot. So it starts in verse 9. I know about your suffering and your poverty, but you are rich. I know the blasphemy of those opposing you. They say they are Jews, but they are not, because their synagogue belongs to Satan. Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. The devil will throw some of you into prison to test you. You will suffer for 10 days. But if you remain faithful, even when facing death, I will give you the crown of life. Anyone who has ears to hear must listen to the Spirit and understand what he is saying to the churches. Whoever is victorious will not be harmed by the second death. Second. So that's the whole letter. That's it. Not long, right? So Jesus, to recap, Jesus says, hey, you're suffering right now. They got some painful aspects of their life, and they're in poverty, so they don't have much. He also says that they're under attack, that they have enemies in their life, right? And the worst kind of enemy, the kind of enemy that misrepresents themselves and then lies about you. Anybody have an enemy like that? The kind that just kind of makes stuff up about themselves, make themselves seem some way, and then makes you feel a different way? That kind of enemy. And then he says, they're going to suffer more. They're already suffering, they're already in poverty, they already have enemies, and by the way, you're going to suffer more. Not exactly a great letter to receive from Jesus, right? Can you imagine like going down to the mailbox, you got this letter from Jesus, like I got a letter from Jesus, you open it up and this is what you read. Hey, things are really tough. They're going to get worse. Okay, bye. Love Jesus, right? You're like, is there a PS here? Like what? Wow. But there is one part of this letter that sticks out. You probably noticed it. One part of the letter like kind of looks like it doesn't fit. This little line, just 4 words, right in the beginning. But you are rich. That's weird. It's just weird. Whenever I read the Bible and I see something weird, I always want to research it. Like it doesn't fit. The whole momentum of the letter, the whole direction of the letter seems to be pushing one way, and then all of a sudden you got this line that kind of cuts back across. It looks like it doesn't belong. Completely interrupts the flow. The only way this makes sense is if this line is written from a different perspective than the other lines in the letter, right? So Jesus is over here looking at their situation. He said, okay, yeah, you're suffering and you got poverty and man, you got some enemies and there's more coming. But over here, I got this perspective over here. Yeah, you got to come over here because if I look at it from this angle, you're rich. You're like, but over here, poor. But over here, rich. Like, that's crazy. That's the only way this makes sense, right? Is for Jesus to jump back and forth between 2 perspectives because he's talking about the same thing. He's looking at the same thing from 2 separate angles. That's a really important thing for us to realize here. That you're both rich and poor at the same time. Seeing the situation in Smyrna from two perspectives. He's acknowledging that there are two ways to look at what you're experiencing in your life. There's a physical way to look at it and a spiritual way to look at it. Suffering looks one way when you look at it from a physical perspective, and it looks a completely different way when you get around and you can get a spiritual perspective. You're looking at the same thing, you're experiencing the same thing, but you're choosing to look at it from two separate perspectives. This is vital in your life. To remember when things don't go right, when you're suffering, when you're experiencing pain, when things don't look the way you want them to look, that you can actually have two separate perspectives on the thing. There's a physical way to look at it and a spiritual way to look at it. There's one thing going on in one, and there's another thing going on in the other. So, let me ask you this. What's the most common thing you ask when you suffer? It's one word. It's easy. Why? Right? Oh, dear God, why? Why? Why is this happening? That thing, why is it happening? Right? Everybody asks it. It almost seems instinctive, right? It's almost like it's a built-in question, like it just kind of comes out of us. Why? And if you're looking at things from a completely physical standpoint, it's actually not that hard of a question to answer if you're just living over here, right? There's like three possible reasons. Number one, you live in a sinful, messed up world, and sometimes the mess just invades your life, right? There's no real, like, deep reasons for it, you know? Your basement floods, you get sick, you get laid off, stuff just happens. You're in a messed up world, and that stuff just kind of invades sometimes. So that's one reason, not super satisfying. Second reason you might suffer from a purely physical standpoint is other people's stupidity, right? You've experienced this where other people make dumb choices and it affects your life, right? Why'd I get in that car accident? Because that person was texting while driving, you know? Like that's why it's a stupid decision on their part. Oh man, why am I hurting right now in my relationship? Because your significant other's making selfish decisions. Like it's their stupid choices that are affecting your life. And then the last reason you might suffer from a purely physical standpoint is one that we don't like to admit. It's your own stupid choices, right? It's you choose things that hurt you. You know, my finances are a mess. Well, get off Amazon, man. Like, Prime Day is tomorrow. So, okay, you have a problem. You need to stop, right? Stop spending money you don't have. My boyfriends keep cheating on me. Well, stop dating slime balls. Like, you know, this is your choices. Your picker's broken. You need somebody to help you and show you the person to date next because your own stupid choices are hurting you. So from a purely physical standpoint, it's not that hard to answer the question why. But that's never really what you mean, is it? You don't mean why from here. You don't, whatever, that the person was texting and driving, that's not that important. What? Oh, well, my basement's flooded. Well, it rained. You know, like it's that's not that deep for you. You're asking something else. You really want to know the reason, especially the reason you direct that question up, is because you want this answer. You want the spiritual answer to the question, why is that happening? You want to get around and get a different angle on the thing that's happening. You want a spiritual answer. So, you ask God why. And what I want to do is I want to give you three possible reasons, like three possible answers. Which is a crazy thing to even try to do. Some pastors, and I'll be honest, even my own temptation is to tell you to I deleted it. I had this whole like little story about how my kids ask me why all the time and it annoys the crap out of me. To say like, don't ask God why like my kids ask me why. But then I had to back up and I'm like, all the good stories in the Bible have characters who are asking God that question. You know, like Job asked it for 60 chapters or something like that, right? And God was like, God liked Job, you know, and Jacob wrestles with God. And God liked that. And even Jesus from the cross asks, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this question of why actually gets asked by all the really good characters in the Bible. And I think the reason that is because even though it feels maybe wrong sometimes to like lock horns with God, at least you're engaging him. God liked that Job didn't push away. Job drew close. Jacob didn't push away. He drew close. Jesus didn't push away. He drew close. Like there's an engagement with God when you're asking that question, and God likes that. God likes the closeness. God likes that you would engage him and ask the question and wrestle with that. So the question why is actually a really good question. You got to be okay not getting an answer or not getting the answer that you wanted, but don't be afraid to ask it, even in the midst of enormous pain. So what I want to do is I want to give you 3 possible answers as to why you're suffering. First one, God is doing something in the spiritual realm that you cannot see. God is doing something in the spiritual realm that you cannot see. There's a spiritual reality playing out behind the scenes of the physical one that we live in, right? And one affects the other and vice versa, right? Spiritual things affect physical things affect spiritual things. The rub is, we're not really sure how or how much and what goes into that interaction between the physical and the spiritual. We don't know. But we do know that they affect each other. And a lot of times what's happening behind the scenes spills over into your life. There's this battle taking place behind the scenes that we can't see that does affect the things that are happening in your life. Paul mentions in Ephesians 6:12, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of this unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, against evil spirits in the heavenly places, unseen. There's stuff happening that you can't see in your life. Paul's acknowledging that there is a world behind the world, spiritual enemies, spiritual battles to win. And we can't always make the connection between what happens in our life and what's happening behind the scenes. We don't always know. And if you look at the story of Job, this is super obvious, right? Job's whole life, if you're not familiar with the story, Job's whole life gets turned upside down. Job, he loses his family, he loses his livelihood, he loses his wealth, he loses his health, he loses everything. And it didn't make sense from over here. None of that stuff made sense. Why did my kids die? Well, because a storm hit. Why did I lose my cattle? Because somebody came and stole them. Like that's not what he wanted when he was asking why. The real reason why was a spiritual interaction that was taking place between God and our spiritual enemy that Job didn't know about. That was the real reason why, that God was doing something in the spiritual realm that Job didn't know, and by the way, never did. You get to the end of the story, Job asks why repeatedly, and God says, I'm God and you're not, sit down, and he does. And that's it. So he never finds out. But there's stuff happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. There's spiritual things that affect your life. And that's one possible reason why you might be suffering. And that's probably the least satisfying one. I put that one first, by the way. You're like, wait, so I could be suffering just because there's like a spiritual war and I'm like collateral damage? That's one. That's not the only one. It's almost never the only one, by the way. Second possible reason why you might be suffering is because God's doing something in your heart that you can't see. It's not just happening out there or behind there or however you want to think about it. It's happening in here. Sometimes God allows suffering in your life because he needs to go to work in here in your life. Suffering on the outside is a tool that God is using to change something on the inside. He's getting after something in here. James chapter 1, 2-4 says this, Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Shut up, James, right? For you know that when your faith is being tested, endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. So what James is saying is God's working on you. God has a plan in his mind for who he wants you to become. He's shaping and molding you into that person. And sometimes, can we be honest, you have rough edges. You have stuff that God can't gently sand off. He has to take a chisel of pain and he's got to and break that piece of you off. So God actually is allowing this suffering into your life because he's trying to do something in here. And what you got to remember, see, this is the hard part. When you have a disagreement with God, you got to remember his priority is this. He cares more about what's going on in your heart than what's going on in your life. Like, so you got to line up your priorities, right? Because if you're like, I care more about my life looking this way than my heart looking this way, God's going to be like, nope, that's not the way I'm operating. God cares more about the condition of your soul than your circumstances. So he may allow circumstances to come into your life because he cares more about your heart. And you got to remember that, because if your priority's over here, you're going to have all kinds of fighting with God. And God's going to be like, listen, we just have two different end goals in mind here. I'm after this. God wants to change your heart. And James says, it is a kind of ridiculous line when you just look at it. When you have troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. That's absurd, right? It's again one of those, you look at it and you go, wait a minute, what? Just like Jesus saying, you're poor, but you're rich. James is doing the same thing here. Oh, you got trials and tribulation. Come here. It's an opportunity for joy, though. Come over here. Yeah, you don't want to come over here. Come over here, like this is joy. There's two separate perspectives smushed right together in the Bible. One thing sitting next to another thing that doesn't make sense, but it's because they're looking at them from two different perspectives. Your suffering can be joyful because God is moving in your life. When stuff goes wrong, and we always look at good things as a sign from God that God's moving, but man, so often the Bible talks about, hey, he disciplines those he loves. He wants to turn you into the person that he has in his mind, not who you are now, but who he wants you to be, and he's going to use whatever he can to shape you. And if you go back to Job, God wasn't just dealing with things in the spiritual realm. Yes, there's this cosmic standoff happening between him and Satan, but God is also working on Job. Job is a better guy on the other side of his suffering than he was before he went into it. Job was better. Matter of fact, a guy named Abraham Heschel says this: faith like Job's cannot be shaken because it is the result of having been shaken. Faith like Job's cannot be shaken because it is the result of having been shaken. I love that. The only way to get unshakable faith is to get shook. For God to do that to your life. So I think most of us in this room, at least if you're mildly interested in spiritual things, you want strong faith. You want to be that Christian. You want to be that person who's like a rock, but you don't realize what it's going to take to get there. God's like, hey, I want that too, but you just don't know the cost. It's going to hurt a little bit. You got to go through the fire. Pain is a necessary component of growth. And some of you, see, this is the fascinating part. Some of you, you've had really hard things happen in your life. Some of you, just in the past year, 5 years, 10 years, you've had some really, really hard things happen to you. Really hard. And now here you're looking back on that and you can see that God used that to shape you into the person you are now. You know that, right? You're stronger now. You have better faith now because of what God did in that suffering. You're like a better person for it. You know that looking backwards. It's not that you want to live it again, but you wouldn't make it go away either, right? You wouldn't trade it for something else. You know that God did something with that. What I'm asking you to do is take that perspective as you look backwards and apply it forwards. Understand that if God used pain to get me to be this strong person, that if he's going to take me to be that person, the path to get there might include some pain. It might include some discomfort because he really wants me to be that. He doesn't want me to stay this forever. I'm thankful for how far I've come, but I know he's got a long way to go. So there's going to be pain along that way because he wants you to be that. It's going to hurt. So that's the second possible reason you could be suffering in your life, is because God's working here. God's working here. And that's where you can maybe, it's okay to shift your why question into a what. What are you doing? How can I, can I learn this an easier way, God? I think that's a very innocent prayer. I pray that sometimes. Can I learn this easy way? Is there an easy way to learn this? I want to be with you in this, God. I want the student to be with the teacher in this. Show me what you're trying to do here. So that's your second reason. Your third reason, it's the biggest one of all. God is doing something in eternity that you can't see. This is the third reason that God might be allowing suffering into your life, because God is doing something in the super big picture that you can't see. We have to back up and remember that God is not confined to your 60, 70, 80, 90 years here on this earth. You know that, right? He's not confined to working everything out in that amount of time. God sees a much, much, much bigger picture than we do. He's not confined to your lifespan. He's thinking beyond that. He's planning for not your present reality, but for a very distant future reality for you. And he's acting according to that plan. Martin Luther King Jr. said this: "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Now, it's obvious to see what he was meaning in that, but I like the idea that there's like a long arc of what God is doing. Like God's got this plan, and it's big. It's so big that it's going to land somewhere out here. And you, from where you're at, you can't really see it. And matter of fact, some things that God is doing, he started them, and you're going to die like right here. And it's going to keep going. It's going to land somewhere over here. It's so big that your life can't even contain the thing that he's doing. And I guess that's one of the hardest things to even try to wrap your brain around, that God's not confined to your lifespan. Back up and look at this letter that Jesus sent to Smyrna. Verse 10 specifically. Look what he says. "Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. The devil will throw some of you into prison to test you. You'll suffer for 10 days. But if you remain faithful, even when facing death, I'll give you the crown of life." I love the symmetry of those things. It's a crazy verse though, isn't it? I mean, first of all, he says the devil's going to throw you into prison. And we all know, like, there's not actually the devil. He's not like getting them with the pitchfork, like putting them in prison. You know that, right? Like, there's not, he's saying, hey, there's some stuff happening in the spiritual realm. Over here, Jesus is giving him a little glimpse. Hey, like, I know it looks like these enemies are throwing you into prison, but come here. This is a spiritual thing. This is a spiritual thing that's happening. So he's trying to get him to see that. And then he says, you're going to suffer for 10 days. And I wish I could get inside some of your minds, because I feel like at least one of you in this room went, week, right? 10 days? A week and a half? I think I can handle that, right? Like, Smyrna, you guys got it easy. 10 days? And they get to know when it's going to be over? Like, wait a minute. That's part of the hard part of suffering, is you don't have the light at the end of the tunnel. But there's a couple of dangerous assumptions we make in thinking that, if you did think that. Number one, almost every scholar I read, again, if you have to back up and remember that the book of Revelation is largely symbolic. So when it says 10 days, might not literally mean 10 days. Many of the guys I read, I didn't read all the way into this, I'm admitting that to you, but they said 10 years is probably what it meant. And I'm like, wow, okay. It's a period of time. There's a start and there's going to be a finish. Didn't literally mean 10 days, probably. The second dangerous assumption you make, if you kind of mock Smyrna and say, you guys got it easy, is that at the end of the suffering, you think then that means, you mean like the suffering's going to be over and we're going to get released from prison and our life's going to get better? Is that what that means? Because that's what we think, right? It's all going to be good from that, whenever it ends, on. But that's an assumption, is it not? It just says that the suffering's going to end. It doesn't say how. And isn't it possible, even likely, if you feel the momentum of this letter, that it's not going to end by their enemies leaving them alone and their life getting better, but maybe their suffering is going to end because they die? Isn't that possible? They're released from suffering in a very definitive way. Your suffering is going to last for 10 days. But if you remain faithful, even when facing death, you're going to get the crown of life. What if that's what Jesus is saying here? You're going to suffer for 10 days, whatever that is, and then you're going to die. Your suffering is going to be over. What if that's it? What if that's like the message of this letter? Let me ask you, is that good news or bad news? Suffer. Hey, the rest of your life you're going to suffer and then you're going to die. Is that good or bad? Get it from over here. Okay, that sucks. Yeah, bad. But what if you come over here? What if you look at it from this perspective? What does it look like then? It depends on how you look at it, right? You're going to suffer for your whole life and then just die. That's the worst. But that's not It's not how it ends. Jesus is telling them, hold on to something. Hold on to something. Don't let go, because on the other side of that suffering, there is something unimaginably good if you can just hold on. He's trying to get them to come over here and look. It's going to be really bad, but you got to come over here and see your suffering from a different perspective. Check this out. This is so cool. So the leader of the church in Smyrna is a guy named Polycarp. He's actually, and it's a really cool thing if you're into church history, he's a direct disciple of John, who's writing the book of Revelation, okay? So he's one of these early church fathers, really important when it comes to the history of the church, and he's a direct disciple of John. So isn't that cool? Like, Jesus discipled John, and then John discipled Polycarp. So he's like one of the most early you can get. Like, he's one step away from Jesus. Really cool. And he's one of the leaders in the church in Smyrna if you look back in the history. And many of the scholars that I read this week believe that Polycarp was the leader of the church when this letter got sent. So John, when he writes this, when Jesus says, send this to the angel in Smyrna, he meant Polycarp. So Polycarp's the one who, when this letter comes, he opens it up. And he's reading that. And I go, okay, all right. This is life now. So Polycarp, he's a really cool leader in the church, powerful voice in Christianity. Like I said, if you're super like church nerd, you can read some of the stuff that he wrote. He's really important. He lives to be 86 years old. That's old, right? By almost anyone's standards. And then when he gets to that point, Rome decides they're done with this guy. They're tired of him preaching about Jesus. They're tired of him not worshiping their gods. They're tired of him not worshiping Caesar like everybody else does. So they arrest this old man. They chase him down and they arrest an old man. And what they do is they drag him into the arena. And if you're even a tiny bit familiar with Rome, if you find yourself in the arena, it's not a good thing, right? This is where people come to die. So they put him on trial in this arena. And basically, the message that the leaders at the time give Polycarp is, hey, you're old, so we're going to give you a chance here, buddy. Just renounce Jesus, say Caesar is Lord, we'll let you go live out whatever you got left, buddy. And they act like you're doing him a favor. Okay, so just like picture the scene. They drag this old man into the middle of this arena. And he's probably, he's old, he's hurting. He's probably standing there like this. You got this angry crowd all around. They just bloodthirsty, right? They just want to see a show. And they like the way worship is set up in Rome. So they would refer to Christians as atheists. Isn't that weird? Because we didn't worship all the gods. We only worshiped one God. So the way they saw it, they're like, why are you such an atheist? Isn't that weird? Is that how things have changed? So they actually accused him of being like an atheist. You don't believe in all our gods. You don't worship Caesar. You're a traitor. So they're all angry and they all want to see something happen. And the leaders act like they're doing this guy a favor. And he's just standing there. Can't you imagine that? Like, you got the dust and the smell of blood and death around you. And they're like, hey, old man, you can walk. We'll let you go. You don't have to endure this. Just say Jesus isn't Lord and Caesar is, and we'll let you go. You're welcome. And Polycarp stands there. Can't you just imagine like the whole crowd? Like, hold up, shh. The whole crowd kind of quiets. And the old man's standing there, and he gets as straight as he can, and this is what he says. 86 years I've served Christ, and he never did me any harm. How then could I possibly blaspheme my king and my savior? Since you are so urgent that I should swear by the fortune of Caesar and pretend not to know who and what I am, hear me declare with boldness, I am a Christian. I can't say the word that I want to say that describes that. That's just really cool. I haven't found the Christian term for it yet. They burned him alive right then. Killed him. They were excited. This is Rome, man. This is like the sporting event. They dragged wood out. They drug him over to the pole. And they killed him. The best part was they went to tie him up around the pole, and he's like, you don't have to. And they're like, okay. They didn't tie him up because they actually believed he's not going to go anywhere. Like, he's actually okay with this for some reason. They respected him that much that they didn't tie him to the pole. They just let him burn. Burn him alive. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, that's a horrible story, right? Take your Christian glasses off for a minute. An 86-year-old man was burned alive by an evil empire in a most gruesome and torturous way. That's a horrible story. That's one of the worst. Rome just sucks, right? But if you come over here, it's different over here, isn't it? All of a sudden, you got this old man who's got he's not strong, but there's something about him that everybody's a little bit taken back by. The strength that emanates off of him, even though physically he's nothing. There's something, he's like a spiritual giant standing in this arena. And think about this, church history says that he was praying while he was being burned alive. Over here, this is sad. This is sad. But over here, how about praying a prayer that starts on earth and ends in heaven? That's pretty cool, huh? That's a really cool thing. I like that perspective. And what about okay, you're dying, that's it, but what about the first thing you see is Jesus walking up to you saying, "Did it. Good job. Well done." What were you saying, by the way? How awesome is that? Your last smoke-filled breath here, but your first free breath your soul has ever taken here. Crowd cheering to your death here. A much bigger and more powerful one cheering as you walk into heaven over what you just did. It just depends on which perspective. Horrible actually might be one of the coolest things ever. It depends on your perspective. How do you look at it? So, what is happening in your life right now that you're looking at from over here, and it looks bad, that you need to get over here and look at it from this perspective? What's happening? What kind of pain, what kind of suffering do you have in your life? And let me ask you, what prevents you? What's here? What stops you from coming from here to here? What is it? Pain? Life? Is it worth letting you stay over here? Is it worth preventing you from getting over here? And what if the bridge between only seeing things in the physical and seeing things in the spiritual, what if it's just faith? Just faith. Faith that God is doing something, even if you can't quite see it. He's up to something. Faith that you're going to choose to stand here, even if you can't quite see what you're looking at, you're going to choose to be here. Faith. Even though you can't see God's hand, you trust his heart. What if that's all you need? It doesn't make sense over here. I can't see your hand moving. I'm praying for you to do something and you're not. I smell smoke. But you trust his heart. He's doing something. That if you endure all the way to the end, he's got a crown for you. You're going to die, but you're going to get a crown. It's going to be totally worth it. Totally worth it. It won't be a question when you reach the end. 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18 have been, since I was in high school, some of my favorite verses. But my understanding of them keeps getting deeper. Here's what they say. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal. The things which are not seen are eternal. Paul, I love it. Momentary light affliction. Imagine Paul talking like that to Smyrna, to Polycarp. It's a momentary light affliction. You're going to get burned alive. Whatever. You're going to suffer for 10 days. But it's light compared to the weight of what is over here. It's so much more important what's over here than what's over there. Over here is the suffering itself is temporary. It's not going to last forever. That's part of our hope as a Christian, is that your life, even if it goes, you're going to suffer and then you're going to die. Even if it goes like that, that's not the end of the story. That is merely the beginning. It's like the title page of the story that he's going to write for eternity. A billion years from now, you're not even going to remember that. That's why he says, hold on, because this weighs so much more than that. So I guess I hope that you can fight for perspective. When you're suffering, when you're enduring, you can fight to choose to see that God's up to something, that he's doing something. And I want to invite some of the worship team back up. We're going to, I'm not going to participate. They're going to play a song and sing. And I want you guys, especially, man, if you're one of the people going through it right now, if you've got something that's happening, I want you to take this time and pray and ask God that while it's easy to be here, ask him to help you see from over here. Ask him to give you a different perspective on what you're enduring. If you feel like he's doing something in your heart, ask him. Ask him to show you what it is. If you feel like, man, it's eternity and I just got to be able to hold on to what he's doing is so much bigger than me, then ask him to be able to grasp that for whatever your mortal brain can grasp. Ask him to help you with that. Ask him to help you see things from this perspective. Let's pray.